delivering effective collaboration, effective partnerships. We will get going in just a couple of minutes. We're just going to let a couple more people join because we can see that people are still joining. So we'll just be a minute or two. So just hold tight and we'll get going in just a moment. Okay, welcome again all, and I'm delighted to say that we are to see so many familiar faces for people who have been on the previous 3 modules. And just to give just a reminder of how it works, what happens in these modules, that firstly, just to mention that we do record all of these training modules. They will be then posted onto the website so that you can have a look at them in the future. Group activities are not recorded, so feel free to be entirely open, say whatever you like. It's a safe space for the discussions when you're in the group activities. All the way through, we'd be most grateful if you could keep your microphones muted, but if possible with your cameras on, because it's much nicer for the speakers to be able to see real people. And then finally, at any point, thoughts, questions, comments, just put them in the chat and we will integrate them into the discussions and the presentation. As before, the way that this works is that I will start by giving almost like a lecture on partnership theory, this time focusing on the management of partnerships. Then it's followed by a sort of peer-to-peer exchange on a particular topic. And then I'm delighted that we have some colleagues joining us. We have Jessie Turner, who's the Executive Director of the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification. We have Steve Rowcliffe from Blue Ventures. People who were on the call yesterday will remember that Marcus from Blue Action talked about Blue Ventures, or mentioned Blue Ventures because they are one of their grantees. And we'll be hearing all about how Blue Ventures manages to integrate the ecological preservation and then the social progression of the communities with which it works. And hopefully, I don't know if Ashma is here yet, but hopefully we'll also be joined by Ashma McDougall, who's the president of the National Youth Council of Dominica. Great. So let's get going, and also feel free to introduce yourselves into the chat as well, should you want to do so. Right, so let's see, where did we get to? Where are we with this course? So we started with the first module about why partner. You'll remember strategically the different forms and types of collaboration and how different types of partnership can deliver different types of value. You might remember talking about the collaborative advantage and the intrinsic reason why partnerships can deliver more than the sum of the parts, whether that's to deliver innovation or scale or holistic approaches, or just bringing together the complementary resources that different societal sectors have in order to create a complete solution. But in the end, we talked about the fact that partnerships need to create considerable additional value, because the amount of time and investment that's required to make partnerships work effectively. The second module, we looked at the partnership relationship and how partnerships really do move at the speed of trust, and the quality of the relationship is really the biggest single factor in terms of ensuring that a partnership is able to deliver most effectively. And we talked about what makes up the relationship, the trust, the equity, the mutual benefit, and the commitment of partners, and that interaction of all those different elements is what makes up the quality of the relationship, and therefore the likelihood of the sustainability of the partnership. Then in module 3, we looked at how you go about building these partnerships. We looked at the partnering journey. You may remember that we described it in terms of the journey that the partnership itself takes with the different partners, negotiating collectively, brainstorming, developing thoughts, ideas, eventually focusing down to the clarity over the partnership's objectives, its activities, its targets, the roles and responsibilities, etc., etc. And we also talked about the partnership journey that individual organizations need to take. And you looked at the internal prospective partnership assessment tool to see how that can help organizations move along their partnership journey as quickly as possible, so that they can get to a point where they're sure that the partnership is going to deliver strategic value for the organization. You've got the internal buy-in, you've done the due diligence from all of the partners, you've made sure that it delivers strategically on your objectives, all of these things, so that all the partners who complete this process can then happily sign a partnering agreement at the end of that partnering journey. So those were the first 3 modules, and now we're moving on to the 4th module, which is really around managing partnerships. But before we do, there's kind of a step between that partnership journey and this concept of managing partnerships. And that's really sort of in this 3rd building block, the structuring and setup. And I want to talk just a little bit around partnership agreements and how partnering agreements are different to standard grants or standard contractual agreements. And the thing is that contractual agreements tend to be somebody giving funding or money in some way according to their own sort of procurement rules. Usually in contractual agreement, the organization with the funding is basically telling the other one what it's supposed to be doing, and the accountability is all one way. There's a strong power imbalance between the two organizations. It's a legally binding contract, and control is the sort of the legal censure if one party does not deliver on the contract. Now, partnership agreement is quite different, because a partnership agreement is, firstly, it's jointly developed to fulfill both partners' legal requirements or other requirements. And it really is supposed to be around mutual accountability, and it needs to, in fact, ensure that partners are mutually accountable. It's around building equity between and among the partners rather than cementing power relationships. It talks about non-tangible resources as well that every partner brings to the table, which is important to ensure that there is respect for each of the partners, and also important when it comes to that power balance as well, because as we heard last week rather, some of the things that give power are the sort of the key essential resources that are brought to the table. And you might be a small community organization, but if you're the ones with the social capital and the connections into a community, then that is an essential resource for the partnership, just as much as a major grant might be an essential resource for the partnership. Partnering agreements also tend to be much more based on trust as the sort of the driver or the control, if you like, for the partnership. So they tend not to be legally binding. They tend to be sort of voluntary arrangements. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't sometimes a transfer of money or something else, which does require a contractual agreement in addition to the partnership agreement. And it's worth thinking about when money is transferred in a partnership, it's not that you are paying, for example, the NGO to join the partnership. What you are doing is you are providing resources, providing funding that allows the NGO to bring its resources to the table. And that's the way that we need to think about these collaborations, these types of partnerships. Now, so what does a partnership agreement look like? And we talk about this idea that basically it sort of sets out the who, why, what, how of the collaboration. And it sets out in particular, the who of who the partners are and why they want to be involved, what they bring to the table, why a partnership approach, what is the value, the extra value that the partnership brings, because how is it that it can deliver more than the sum of the parts. It'll look at things like the external communications and intellectual property, so to determine those things. It also potentially, in fact, we do recommend it include a charter. And what we mean by a charter is a charter for good partnering behavior, which is really expressly setting out the principles, values, and expected behaviors to which all partners are committing in a partnership. So, for example, this might be around the principles that partners are committed to working towards the interests of the partnership as a whole alongside their own individual objectives, and also to help other partners to achieve their objectives. So if you go into a partnership, it cannot be all about what can we gain from this partnership. It has to be what can we gain and ensure that others are also gaining in order for the partnership to maximize the value creation and for it to be as sustainable as possible. Then there are what we talked about, some of the principles of partnering. So partners committing to the principles of equity, co-creation, respect for other partners, and committing to be open and transparent in the partnership as well. And accountable, we need the accountability to each other, but collectively accountable to, for example, donors that might fund a partnership. All the partners need to be collectively accountable to it. And things like sharing the glory. So when partnerships are successful, then everybody wants to claim them. Everybody wants to say, yes, this was our program, and look at this amazing work that we did. And we need to be very careful here. We need to ensure that all partners absolutely do share the glory. They're properly recognized in all external communications. Then there might be something around review and learning. So committing to regularly review how effectively the partnership is working. And we'll be talking a lot about that a little bit later on. And then the spirit of learning together and capturing experiences. Partnering is never easy. And if partners can be collectively learning from it and then introducing this into their organizations, then we will be in a much better position the next time we're involved in a partnership. Then finally, looking at how we deal with challenges, difficulties. So all partnerships have difficulties and challenges, all of them. No partnership just works smoothly and easily. And the trick is how you deal with those challenges when they do come up. And so this is where we really need partners to commit to firstly being open about the challenges that they're facing. So it could be, for example, that they're not able to deliver the commitments they have made. And what we need is for them to be open about it early on, so a challenge does not become an existential challenge to the partnership. So if one partner flags early on that they're not able to deliver something, then somehow the partnership can step in, or other partners might be able to step in, or you can reformulate what you're doing. So it doesn't become something that actually can destroy the partnership. It just becomes a challenge, collective challenge, to be able to be tackled by the partners altogether. And that idea of collectively delivering, collectively solving these challenges is a hugely important part of partnership working, because if you do that, then it absolutely helps to cement the partnership relationship as well. And as we know, if you have a good partnership relationship, you will have much more likely to have an effective, successful partnership. So that gives you an idea of what should go into a partnership agreement and potentially a partnership charter as well. And there's more information about partnership agreements. I've just uploaded a tool, and I should say in this session there will be a few tools that I'll be introducing to you that I hope will be useful to your practice. And as I've mentioned before, these are all from the SDG Partnership Guidebook. So let's move on to the fourth building block. And as I said, please do put any questions, thoughts, comments in chat. And of course, as you know, as ever, there will be, of course, the time for discussion amongst you, the peer-to-peer discussion. Also, in this one, at the end of the workshop, the last 15 minutes of the workshop will be open to any sort of question you might have, any challenges you have. Feel free to just bring them up. Any question about partnership for us to discuss. Okay, so let's take a look at management. And I sort of mentioned this briefly before about the key elements of management. And project management, as I discussed previously, is particularly hard because you are dealing across organizations. And that makes it much harder. You don't have the usual systems and internal systems and processes and command and control or whatever it may be for your own organization. You're having to work with multiple organizations, each of them with competing priorities. So that has to be project management on steroids. The next element is around relationship management. And what we know is that one of the biggest challenges in partnership is the organizational cultural differences. And if you are, for example, a government and you're trying to work with a company, and governments tend to work in a certain way, they tend to be quite bureaucratic. And I don't say that in a negative way. Governments need to be bureaucratic to make sure that public funds are spent as effectively and optimized as much as possible. But that means they tend to be slower to act, and whereas companies might be, in many cases, can move much more quickly and have much greater clarity about what they're trying to achieve, and have different timescales to government or even to NGOs, or the UN system, where the due diligence process within the UN system can be extremely slow. It can take 6 months, a year, in order to process particularly companies through the UN due diligence system. All of these things, the different ways of working, the different underlying values, the different approaches and priorities and principles of different organizations means that there is a cultural mismatch, an organizational cultural mismatch, so that when you are working closely together, you get friction. So in partnership, that's why relationship management is so important, to be able to understand others' organizational cultures, our own organizational cultures, understand where there might be issues and challenges that will appear. And these could be as simple as having different, as we heard yesterday, different financial years between different organizations. So one organization might need to disperse funding by the end of May. Another organization can only receive funding from the beginning of October, or whatever it may be. There are always these issues. And that's where the conversations and the relationship management is just so important, to see the potential issues where there's going to be this friction, and then talk about it and find creative solutions. As I mentioned before, it's a joint partnership challenge to which you jointly find the solutions. The third element is around ongoing review and iteration of partnerships. So rather than just sort of simply starting and saying, okay, let's design our partnership and design it at full scale and spend forever creating the perfect governance structure, perfect management structures, you hiring 10 members of staff, etc., etc. Rather than that, start smaller. and start with a temporary governance structure. Start with just find your feet, get going, work together, understand how each partner works, how they think, see if there are some early wins for the partnership, smaller, low-hanging fruit that the partnership can deliver, because then that builds confidence and it builds trust and it builds understanding, so that then you can really sort of review how you're doing, how you're going, and then you can iterate and change to then really build up your partnership. All of this, of course, needs to be underpinned by communication, the highest level of communication. It is the communication element is always a challenge. The reason why partnerships go wrong is because there's often challenges in communication. And just to mention on this communication, partnerships is a little bit different in a sense to other forms, because there is kind of 3D communication. There are 3 ways. There's partnerships where you are communicating with, you've got to communicate within your own organization, within your own partner, but there's also communicating among the partners, and then there's communication of the partnership to the outside world. And each of these needs to be done carefully and considerately. Within your own organization, you want to be pushing the partnership as much as possible. You want the partnership to become more and more important to your organization, more visible to the organization, particularly because if you happen to leave, then you do not want the partnership to go downhill just because you, the relationship manager, has left. So you need to keep it important to your organization. Then, of course, there's the communication among partners, ensuring that it's the right things being communicated in the right way, at the right times. And that we say we highly recommend at least 3 different forms. One is, of course, the formal report writing that might be necessary, absolutely. Then there's the sort of the meetings, the partnership meetings that you might have, the management meetings. But then there's also should be the much more interactive social communication, just picking up the phone to your counterparts in other organizations, or going for coffee with others from other partners, from the other partners, to get to know each other a little bit on a more sort of personal level. And that, again, builds the relationship and helps to make partnerships as effective as possible. So I talked a bit about partnership health check. Well, this partnership health check is kind of part of an overall approach to partnership review and partnership evaluation. And here I'm just going to mention a couple of things on it. And these sort of 4 elements to it, if you like. So the first one is kind of at the beginning or early on in the partnership, but you can, of course, review it. It's really sort of setting out the measurement framework for your collaboration. And that's about understanding what success means for the partnership. It means understanding what you're trying to achieve, but also what is the collaborative advantage, the partnership difference that I meant that we talked about before, that you are trying to achieve. How is it that your partnership is going to deliver more than the sum of the parts? So we should understand then how we would measure progress towards our ultimate goals. And we should be measuring and making sure that we are able to deliver on this collaborative advantage. So that's one element, is setting it up in the first place, and then ensuring that you know what you're trying to achieve, you know how you're going to achieve it, your theory of change for your partnership, and knowing how your partnership how you can ensure the collaborative advantage is delivered. The second element is around monitoring your partnership, and that's tracking progress along your theory of change, or whatever your measures are that you have put in place, your indicators to measure that your partnership is moving, it is progressing forward, it is delivering what it's meant to achieve, and what it's delivering is then having the impact that you want it to have. And so as you're going, you're monitoring, and then you might adjust things. You might realize that, yes, this was our original plan. We were going to undertake we want to undertake these capacity building measures. And yes, we've trained people up, but this hasn't actually then delivered in any improvements to their livelihoods. So we might realize that, yeah, fine, we'll give everybody skills to for example, to construct and install solar panels in hotels. But if you find that there isn't sufficient demand, then for those solar panels, then the fact that you have trained people makes no difference whatsoever. So then your partnership needs to look at, okay, well, we've trained people, but now we need to increase demand. And there has to be another aspect to your partnership, which is then about working with hotels to increase demand, for example. The third element I'll talk about much more, and this is where you're going to get into groups in a moment, is around the health check. And this is really ongoing review of the partnership health, its efficiency, making sure that it is delivering as effectively as it can do, that the quality of the relationship is high, that partners are getting a lot out of the partnership, etc. So that's important to keep your partnership on track and keep the relationship strong. And then finally, there's the evaluation. In a way, in some of this is kind of standard evaluation practice, like you would have with any program. You need to evaluate the impact. But the slight difference is that when you're in a partnership, particularly a cross-sectoral partnership, then you might find that different partners want to measure different things. So for example, well, not an example, as an analogy, a metaphor, you might know about the scientists, either the blind scientists or here the blindfolded scientists who are measuring a different bit of the elephant, and they're seeing different things. So the one measuring the ears or touching the ears thinks it's a fan. The one touching the tusks thinks it's a spear, etc., etc. And you might find that if you're working, for example, with companies, then, and let's take the solidification of hotels example again. So it could be that the hotels, as part of this partnership, what they want to measure is the reduction in costs for the energy that they use. The NGO that's been building up skills might want to measure the livelihood improvement of the people that they have built the capacity of. The government might want to measure the reduction in CO2 that has happened because of the partnership. So it's just a question of being aware that different partners will want to measure different things, potentially. And then as a partnership, ensuring that you are able to deliver that measurement for all of the partners. Right. Okay. As I said, any thoughts or questions on this, just put them straight in chat. Otherwise, I want to get you talking with each other. So so maybe if there are no questions at the moment, I can't see. So I'm going to set you up to be talking with each other, and that's while looking at this partnership health check. And we have in the SDG Partnership Guidebook, there is a partnership health check, which is all around how it is that you can ensure and that you can monitor and then iterate and change to the health and efficiency of your partnership, making sure that it's set up, it's operating, its processes, the relationship, the building blocks of partnership are in place for your partnership, and then be able to do something about it if not. And this particular partnership health check, the way that we suggest you use it is you can do it quite informally. Well, you can do it on your own, for one thing. I mean, let me show you what it looks like. The health check is, in essence, it is a very simple traffic light system where you look at the different building blocks of partnership, the fundamentals, the relationship, the management, the setup, etc. And it asks questions to make sure that these things that the things you'd expect to be in place are in place. So, for example, on partnership relationship, there's something that says partners are transparent about their assumptions, goals, needs, driver, and constraints. Another thing is there's a high level of trust among the partners. Or in the management, the communications of all kinds is sufficiently frequent. Information sharing is effective. The partnership vision remains compelling and relevant to the context. These are all things that you would want to make sure continually stay in place. And the way that we use this partnership health check, as I said, it can be done as an individual, and you're about to do that yourself, in which you can actually test it out on your partnership and see where you would mark things as green, which means that they're perfectly fine, red, which means they are a problem that you absolutely need to do something about, and orange means that actually, probably we need to do something. We need to try to get this towards the green. So it may not be as urgent as a red one, but it is something to keep an eye on. So you can either do it yourself, or you can do it informally with your partners. So at your next partnership meeting, just kind of go through this and discuss each one in turn very sort of quickly, and see if you agree whether it's green, red, or amber. And if everything's green, or the ones that are green, you don't need to worry about. If there are ones where one of you says it's red and one of you says it's green, that's definitely something to worry about, because that means different partners have different expectations or different understanding. But the other way you can do it is actually in a more formal way, which is to actually hold a workshop, or actually before the workshop, you can actually send this out to all the partners, and get all the partners to complete it and then send it back, and then assess it and see where the clear challenging issues are. Hold then a workshop where you talk through the results of the health check survey and collectively prioritize the issues that need to be dealt with, and then really start to work on them, really start to understand. Let's see if something is, partners are sufficiently empowered and enabled to be able to contribute to the partnership. If one of the partners shows that that's red, then you need to discuss it. And it turns out, for example, that they don't have sufficient funding or time to be able to go to partnership meetings. So in fact, we have a Blue Venture colleague on the line. That was one of the issues that occasionally happened, because they had community partners sitting in on the coast of Madagascar, very far from Antananarivo, the capital. And occasionally there would be meetings in Antananarivo because international partners would come in and other partners were based there. And it was always a real challenge, even for Blue Venture staff, to actually make it back to Tanna for a two-day journey. So things like that you need to be able to understand and look at and be aware of, and then find ways to deal with those issues, those challenges. Okay, so that's the tool, and you will see it in the chat. I'd like you all now to click on that in the chat so you have a copy of that tool. Because what I want you to do is individually, I'm going to ask you to look through it. I want you to actually score in your mind, or you can mark it in some way, or however you want to do it. But just go through each of the sections and give yourself, write down on a bit of paper maybe, where you think you're at for your partnership. Now, you may not have if you don't have an active work partnership you're involved in, then maybe you can think about other types of relationship, other types of partnership. You could think about your marital relationship if you wanted to. This partnership health check can be used perfectly well for your own, with your spouse. So have a go, have a look at this health check. Asking to share it again. Let me put it back in the chat. There we go. So if everyone can now just click on that in the chat, make sure you've got tool 7, partnership health check. Shout if for any reason you can't see it. Fatima Zara, you've just joined, and everyone is going to the chat. In fact, I might need to share it again because I don't think you can see previous history of chat. So I've just shared it again. If everyone just clicks on that tool, and then what we'd like you to do is, so on your own, have a look, mark up your partnership, and then in your group, discuss it. Discuss some of what you've found in your experiences going through it. And then what we'd like is for you to actually share, as we've done before, in Mural, some of the findings, some examples some examples of what you found from the health check. Somebody said there is no link. I don't know what you mean. Which link do you mean there is no link of? There should be the tool that you can click on, and there's a link to the Mural, hopefully. So hopefully that's it. I think, Jordan, yeah, I think we can go for it. Let's open the rooms, and we'll have 20 minutes for this one, because you need time to look at it and you need time to discuss it. So, well, we'll start with 15, we might extend to 20. So 15 minutes to start with, and then possibly 20. So away you go. The link to the tool is missing. Is anyone else struggling to see the tool? Because the tool it's not a link, it's a PDF, which is there. Is anyone struggling to see anyone else struggling to see the tool? Or can you give me a thumbs up if you've been able to download the tool? Raj has been able to do it. There's no link to the tool, only see the message for the Mural. So it is actually there. Jesse has been able to see the tool. So I'm not sure why people, I'll tell you what, we'll send you to the rooms. If for any reason you haven't got the tool, then just come back to the main room and we'll give you the tool, because I can see it in the chat very well. I don't know why other people can't. So if you haven't got the tool, just come back to the chat, to the main room. Otherwise, you'll be going to your breakout rooms now. Thanks so much, Jordan. Hi all, welcome back. Just wait a few more seconds before everybody returns from the room. Right, welcome back. I hope that you had some very useful discussions, and most importantly, I hope that you discovered something about your partnerships. And there's a few things that people have kindly put on the Mural. Do feel free to just keep adding to this. I'll just put the link again into the chat. And here we go. That's the link again for the Mural, so that you can continue to add the challenges that you saw. Oh, well, actually, what people have done is, in fact, they've been commenting on the tool itself rather than the challenges that you have seen within your partnerships. So just quickly on the tool itself. Meanwhile, I want two people to tell me the challenges that they've identified because of the tool. So be thinking about challenges that you identified. But you're saying use the tool for each partner to evaluate the other. Absolutely. The partnership everybody should be involved in the evaluation of the partnership. I completely agree. Adapt the questionnaire for the cultural framework. Yeah, as with all of these tools that we're providing, we need to adjust it as exactly to the cultural framework. Using scale instead of traffic lights could be easier for communicational context. Yeah, whatever way works for you, basically. And let's see, what else is there? Adapt the evaluation to be productive when discussed. Yeah, I mean, it's how you frame it. If you frame it as a approach, as a sort of a collective effort, that it's very much, partners seeing eye to eye, and then being able to have these open conversations, then I think then it can work very well. Okay, right, I want maybe just one person, because I want to bring in our discussants, one person just to share their one thing that has been brought up for them about any of their partnerships? One volunteer.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm having some net connection. It's not so stable. That sound is lagging, and I'm reconnecting from each time. But I hope that you can hear me.
Yes, very well. Go ahead.
I've been sharing with my colleague just in the room that the most important thing that we experienced from 2 educational projects on CDGs here in Morocco in education. That's the most important thing that I've been facing. The challenges that there are a lot of challenges, but just if there is no folks and you with the partner that you're working with, that's the most big challenge that you have. You cannot run smoothly through the objective that you are setting. And again, for well-being, if you don't possess your own well-being with your partner, you cannot practice it and be teaching it to others as well. Of course, the third one and the final is the sustainability of the project. It's an indication where we start a project on CDG. It lasts for 1 year, but we are talking about the sustainability of the CDG, not only for 1 year. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, indeed. I mean, just on that last point, I think very often we don't pay enough attention to the sustainability of the partnerships or sustainability of the outcomes from the partnerships. We often start things without thinking, well, how can we end them? And I think that's just, these things are really important to think from the start. Okay, well, listen, thank you very much for doing that, for looking at the tool, and I hope that you might try that out with your partners and have that conversation, and you'll be very everyone who's tried it has come away thinking, wow, why didn't we do this earlier? Can make a huge difference. So now we're moving on to the discussion part, and we have our colleagues Jessie Turner, we have Steve Rowcliffe, and have we lost? I'm just trying to find our third. Ashma, are you there as well? Ashma may be a bit late in joining us, so I'm going to bring Steve to the table and Jessie as well, and then as soon as Ashma joins, then we will hear from her. So let's just get going now with Steve and Jessie. Steve has to leave in 20 minutes, so there'll be a little bit more focus on Steve in the first half of it, and then more on Ashma and Jessie in the second half of it. But first of all, if I could just ask you, Jessie, just tell us about who you are and what your organization does.
Sure. Well, thanks so much, Darren, for having us here. Great training, really valuable presentation at the beginning and tools. So thanks for sharing this out. My name is Jessie Turner. I'm the director or secretariat of something called the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification. And we were launched in 2016 at the Our Ocean Conference, and then quickly sort of solidified at the UN Ocean Conference in 2017, where we made our first commitments to SDG goal or SDG 14. And broadly, we are working to engage governments at different scales, as well as non-government partners around how they're thinking about monitoring for and responding to climate ocean change along their coastlines, particularly as relates to ocean warming, acidification, and oxygen loss. Oh, and you're on mute, Darren.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jessie. Steve, let's hear just an overview of your organization and the type of the partnerships that you're involved in.
Thank you, Darren. Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Rowcliffe. I'm the head of the Frontline Fund at Blue Ventures Conservation. We are a people-focused marine conservation organisation. So we work across largely the coastal tropics in about 14 countries. In 13 of those countries, we work exclusively through partners to deliver people-focused marine conservation on the front lines of the ocean emergency. So yeah, we have around 50 active partnerships across the coastal tropics. Those are financial and technical partnerships. So there's a bit of money that comes from BV as a re-grantor and a bunch of technical support as well to deliver kind of ocean health and livelihood outcomes.
Thanks, Steve. I wonder if I could ask you to give us an specific example of one of your partnerships you're most familiar with. And in terms of sort of the purpose of the partnership, you know, how you developed it. In fact, one of the colleagues on chat has put a set of questions that they'd like to hear answers to, but don't feel you have to follow exactly that. But just to give us a feel for the specific case of one of your partnerships. And I know that you have loads of them. I know they're all brilliant, but just one that's sort of exemplary.
They are, yeah. So there are a bunch of quite different partnerships, but they do all have quite a lot of common themes. And the process that we would go through, although the outcomes are different, the process is roughly the same. So hopefully, I can kind of tick off some of those questions that were in the chat there. So I'll take the example of Mumbao, which is a community-based conservation organization in coastal Tanzania. We've been funding and providing technical support to them for about 8 years now. They were real conservation minnows at the start of our partnership, and now they're at the point where they are kind of turning over roughly $500,000 a year. They're at the point where they're probably large enough to directly seek support from funders to do their own conservation work, which is essentially where we want to get to. So, you know, we used to do a lot of direct implementation. We still do in Madagascar. So where we're delivering the field programs as a conservation organization. But we realized a long time ago that as we started to expand outside Madagascar, that it's far cheaper and more effective to work through partners to deliver this kind of thing. Funders around the world increasingly want to fund local conservation organizations, but the transaction costs of doing so are too prohibitive, so it doesn't happen. And you have to be quite creative with your due diligence in a way that lots of funders would not be comfortable with. So we've been that kind of conduit for a while. We've been saying, look, we will take care of the due diligence. We will work with partners to deliver long-term conservation outcomes over multiple years, and we will provide those partners with technical support and with unrestricted, largely multi-year funding to deliver outcomes. The end result being, if we're really lucky, that organization itself is strengthened and effective. It does brilliant conservation, livelihood, fisheries work, and at the end of the day, we're no longer leaded. We can kind of exit the relationship, and that organization can be large enough that it can seek funding directly from conservation minded donors. So that's our kind of overall approach to partnership. So in the case of Mumbao, they started small, they ended big. There's a question in the chat there. I'm happy. Well, they all have exactly the same objective, and that objective is basically to deliver long-term, durable, community-based marine conservation, fisheries recovery work in a community, right? So some of our partners are smaller than others. Sometimes we will give a small amount of funding and a large amount of technical support to a smaller partner, which is slightly higher risk. Sometimes we will give a large amount of funding and a smaller amount of technical support to sort of larger partners, but the objective is always the same. It's essentially fisheries recovery by communities, for communities around the coastal tropics.
And one thing which I think is so impressive about Blue Ventures is that, and the project or the program I know most about is in Madagascar, working with artisanal fishermen, but it's not just not just working with the fishermen, you're working with whole communities on everything from sex education to alternative livelihoods to sea cucumber farming to it's the whole. It's the whole of sustainable development. It is the social, the environmental, and the economic all in one. And of course, that almost always requires partnerships with those who perhaps are the ones who are into conservation, and then there are the sort of more social NGOs or whatever it may be. Is that something you replicated elsewhere, where you're partnering in order to deliver sort of holistic support to communities?
Yes, is the short answer. But you touched on something there. You're right. I think if we take Blue Ventures back 10 years, if we look at the Madagascar work, you come to the conclusion that we've basically been trying to do all of social development, as you say. Yeah. As a small conservation organisation, that doesn't really work. You can't be all things to all people. That's a recipe for strategic mediocrity. You're never going to manage that, right? You have to focus. So we've learned to focus. We've learned to focus on community-driven fisheries recovery work. So rebuilding, securing tenure and rights for coastal fishers, rebuilding fisheries, building locally driven conservation areas, and then building a kind of like social inclusion piece as well further down the line. So as we've kind of taken what worked in Madagascar and replicated it elsewhere, where we deliver just through partnerships. So yes, BV manages a core partnership with a community-based organization that will be right in the community. It will have permanence, as in it's been in that community for a long time. It will have a long-term commitment to stay there. It will have local legitimacy. Those are the really important things that we're looking for in a partnership. And of course, as you talked about before, Darren, shared values, that being absolutely fundamental to us. If there's not shared values between Blue Ventures and the organization that we're working with, we think that in the long term that might be quite challenging to deliver the kind of conservation outcomes that we're looking for. So yes, there's that direct partnership between Blue Ventures and a small local conservation organization or community-based organization, and then there are the other partnerships. So if we were delivering some of that broader stuff, that holistic stuff that you spoke about, then that would very much be in collaboration with another organization. So when we look at some of the more fundamental organizational strengthening the work that we would do, that will be in collaboration with our partners, Mali Asili, who specialize in organizational strengthening. We can't be all things to all people. We don't want to be. So yes, it's about having those other partnerships with like-minded NGOs that can deliver all of those things together, depending, of course, on what the need of the community is. So if the community doesn't need all that holistic work, it doesn't happen, but ultimately it's driven from what the community need is.
Great, and I think that's a good thing just to end of this particular thing on, is around starting with the needs, understanding the needs, and then you build up the support and the partnerships around based on those needs. And too many partnerships start with the partners and say, what are we doing together, as opposed to starting with the needs and then bringing in the right partners to fulfill those needs. Jessie, I mean, from your perspective, and that in terms of the types of partnerships, I mean, you are a global alliance now, but you started off in the States, I understand, with multiple state governments. In terms of sort of can you just give us a flavor in terms of the partnerships that you might help to support or create, and maybe just an example, and then perhaps also we'll talk about some challenges, and I'll come back to Steve because it all sounds very nice. Great, all good stuff, creating these partnerships, but partnering can be significantly challenging. So, but Jessie, let's hear about your work.
Yeah, well, I'd love to share a little bit more, and I'll answer your question and also look at what George has placed in the meeting chat as sort of an example and case studies of the 1, 2, 3 of really getting started. And I think the OA Alliance is a really great example of that at a small scale, because we are still a very small, scrappy initiative, as I like to say. And Darren, to your point, the nice segue is starting with what the local needs were and what the gaps were on the ground, and then thinking about how we would build out an initiative that supported what we saw as a gap or as a need. And so for context, what that gap and need is increased knowledge at a local scale, coastal scale, around the ongoing impacts of climate change, warming, acidification, and oxygen loss. And this was a really big, important topic on the West Coast of the United States in the early 2000s, because oyster growers in Washington State and Oregon had several years in a row where their baby oysters couldn't grow all the way to adult maturity because the acidity of the ocean or the coastal waters that they were using in hatchery was so low and acidic enough that it prevented the shells from being formed and growing to maturation. And so what that caused at a local scale was a lot of panic around oyster grower operations on the West Coast of North America, which then trickled up to the state governments, thinking about how to protect this important industry, how to protect this important cultural identity and practice in the context of climate change. And so our job, the OA Alliance was really formed because those 3 states got together with other stakeholders in that region, tribal governments, indigenous communities, oyster growers, seafood growers, as well as local academia and local NGOs to sort of say, well, what can we do about this problem? And right now, I think internationally, we know that we can reduce carbon emissions, we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions to slow the ongoing impacts of warming, acidification, and oxygen loss. But our message has been, what are the things that governments can and should be doing now at a coastal scale to better understand what's happening in their region, how it might be important to their keystone species and ecosystems, and what their local adaptation resilience responses might be. And so that was really the gap that we saw we needed to move forward on. And the OA Alliance was just sort of this brainchild of saying, well, we have a lot of experience on the West Coast in thinking about the science to management, science to response on this topic. It seems like other governments internationally at different scales might also benefit from engaging in this discussion. And so that's where we launched the OA Alliance. And to kind of speak to some of these questions in the chat a little bit, we started out, I loved the presentation, how we talked about the partner agreement. We're a voluntary initiative, which means, as you all know, no one's required to respond to your email. No one's required to answer the phone. And when you are operating from that voluntary commitment space, partnerships are essential for getting anything done, and so all of the discussions you've been having in this training course, we've so internalized and is so much part of our story of really organically building an initiative that's now international together. So we started with this call to action, is what we called it. That was our partner agreement, sort of spelling out the problem as we saw it, the options for response, and really trying to engage global actors in making their own commitments at different sizes that were comfortable for them within their capacity, to thinking about their own local response. And so that's really how we started. We identified a small budget. We are still a staff of 1, but because of that, we went to a private funder and were able to secure support dollars for getting started. We've been year by year. We have an annual work plan that continues to engage our members, which now have national, state, tribal, First Nation, port, city governments, as well as a suite of what we call NGO affiliate science partners that aren't government actors. And we have an annual work plan that's now governed and overseen by an executive committee of about 12 of our government members. So that's a little bit of just context, maybe for both seeing the need and trying to fill it, but also structurally how we've slowly started to kind of put some of these practices from the training in place. I'll pause there for follow-up questions, but I give you a little bit of that both and background.
Thank you, Jessie. No, that was brilliant. Exactly what we wanted, sort of a real sort of clear case study, starting with the need, and really good to hear about that development. Just because of the timing, because Steve has to go, I'm just going to go back to Steve to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you found with these, with your partnering, and what you've done with them, and particularly if you've got an example where something's failed. Because that's where we can learn most.
Gosh, so many examples of where stuff has failed. We might not say that to funders, but yes, I can give you an example. I'd say that a couple of examples. One with an organisation again in Tanzania. I'm not going to give their name. We had 2 things went wrong there. The first one was that I said before about how we look for permanence in a community and we look for shared values and local legitimacy. The shared values bit wasn't that strong when we did the kind of partner assessment piece of the broader framework. it wasn't that strong. We had some disquiet. They were very ambitious and weren't as legitimate in the community as we thought they were. Tried to close a very large area to fishing without as much community involvement as there should have been, and the whole thing kind of fell apart in quite short order. So that was, and I think, you know, we learned from that to double down on the fact that, you know, these organizations must have local legitimacy and they must share our values, our commitment to community, to putting communities at the heart of everything. I'll give you another example of an organization, an Indonesian one this time. Again, I'm not going to give their name, don't have to say bad things about organizations. They wanting to see they wanted us to believe they had more absorptive capacity than they did. So we worked together on what was a very ambitious work plan, but one that they felt comfortable delivering, and then they were completely unable to deliver it. And that, again, for us comes down to the fact fundamentally, and I think this is the biggest challenge of all, that this kind of work is super relational, and that if you're trying to scale it, which we all are, we all want to scale. The scale is the holy grail, right? You're trying to scale it. There's that tension between, okay, we've got a bunch of partner support staff and they each know their partners really well. They have very frank and open conversations with them. They have these kind of partner health checks on a regular basis. You can't do that. You can't scale the number of partnerships you've got and scale your support staff in tandem, because you end up as a huge bloated organization that no one wants to fund, unfortunately. So I think that, I think that there is the main challenge, and it's one I don't really have a good answer to, is that real partner work is super relational, and that is an impediment to scaling it. Sorry.
No.
It's a hugely important point, Steve. Yeah, and we discover the same thing even with the partnering initiatives work, that actually what we do is pretty complex, highly relational, and therefore is difficult to scale. Thank you, Steve. I know that you have to go, so maybe the easiest just to thank you very much indeed for joining, and let you head off, and then I'll come back to you, Jesse.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all very much for your time. It was lovely to meet you all. Take care. Wonderful
Brilliant.
Conversation.
Thanks so much, Steve. So Jesse, same question to you really, which is, again, it all sounded very lovely the way you put it, but partnering is never without its challenges. Can you, and often it's around a misalignment of interests, or it can be around power dynamics, with one partner sort of pushing the others around to a certain extent. But what have you found to be your challenges?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I'm just looking at my notes, and I'll talk about challenges, but I'll also, because this is how I'm built, I'll talk about this successes or the benefits, or the, you know, kind of things that have worked well in the partnership first, and then I'll go into challenges.
Let's do both.
But I think one of the tools that we've had, at least for success a little bit, has been, I mean, very much what people have been saying, what the training reflects. You know, every year at the beginning of our work plan, I traditionally would set up one-on-one calls with all of our partners, you know, an hour just to sort of check in. How are you? What are your priorities for this year? What are your concerns? What are your projects that are most of interest to you? And, you know, I just always go back to the whole, you know, kind of comment that, you know, nothing replaces that one-on-one relationship. And it is hard to scale, and it does sort of mean that gets wrapped up in one or two individuals, and trying to figure out management tools and communication structures for breaking that up a bit is so important, which I've loved in this training kind of module. But, you know, I think the biggest thing for us for successes have been that the work plan and the program reflects our members' activities. It reflects their interests, their input, and that, you know, based upon sort of the spread of member goals that I can understand, we can start to put together programmatic pillars that support them in different ways, whether that's by region, by topic, by type of jurisdiction, every single year. And it's not that every single person is going to get 100% support every year, but you do your best to sort of pick and choose that landscape. The second thing that's been super, I think, critical has been that, you know, the government to government exchange at different jurisdictional scales. So at first we thought, well, does a national government care at all about what the state of Washington is doing on oyster hatchery resilience to ocean acidification. And it turns out that, yes, indeed, there's been a lot of interest across different scales, national, state, local, about what the activities are to respond to ocean climate change and ocean acidification. And so being able to have that information sharing across kind of what you might think of non-like actors has been a real need and a really big opportunity for the Alliance to craft that type of information sharing. And then as far as, some of the challenge, and the other quick thing I'll say that we're kind of in a nice, I don't want to say sweet spot, but sort of, is that the science on ocean acidification is actually kind of new. The field of thinking about responding to warming, acidification, and oxygen loss isn't well trodden. And so there really is a need for working with the science community that are growing their understanding of coastal change and helping them translate that information to policymakers that they can actually use and actually respond to. And so I think that's been a big need for us and an opportunity, I suppose, that we're filling, and maybe hopefully in 20 years' time, we won't need to fill. Challenges, quickly, I'll say, you talked a little bit about government moving slowly. I think the biggest thing working with governments is turnover. You're always challenged by elections, by staff changes. You might have built 5 years of a really wonderful working relationship with one individual in government, and then they have to rotate out. And so that really is a challenge and makes you think creatively about how you're building relationships to governments more broadly than just one individual. The second big challenge has been capacity. Again, we're one staff currently with an organizational, with members more than 130.
Please,
And
I am
so
the one question. This is a district community. The community and management system are very important.
Mhm.
Community and the management system are very important.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the community and we say policymakers, which really means like government policymakers, but we also use the word decision makers, right? And decision makers are a lot more broad than just the policy and governance. And so really thinking about who's a decision maker around a different topic or a different resource or a different practice, and how do we reach them to better understand the information that they need to make the best decisions they can in the context of climate change. And so that's been a big element of engaging non-scientific actors, in this space. The quick thing I'll say about capacity, and then I'll we'll turn it over, running out of time. The thing I've really appreciated about this training is thinking about what is your initiative designed to do? What are you trying to solve for? And that, to some extent, you can elevate existing work if that's a need. At a second area, you can information share across your members, across your community of actors. You can be an organization that provides technical or policy guidance, or you can be an organization that, provides direct dollars and funding support for some of this technical work. And I think the biggest thing that we've learned as a small organization growing is that you don't need to do all of it necessarily. And you can really become a convener strategically of these pieces. And so you rely on partnerships. Maybe you're not an organization that's big enough to give money, particularly to projects you want to support, or to give policy guidance in a very specific way. But you can partner with organizations that can provide that type of wraparound service for your members. And so I think that's been a really, our challenge has, to answer your question, Darren, has been capacity. Our solution to that challenge has been really relying on strategic partners to make sure that their goals and their missions can be supported by supporting our members' needs. And so that's been a really big way that we've tried to position ourselves as a convener of mutually beneficial partners.
Jessie, thank you very much indeed for giving those insights. I mean, there are all sorts of things it would be great to pick up on, but unfortunately, just because of the amount of time. But do we have a? No, that's not it's not a question as such. Because what I'd really like to do, because this is sort of now the end of our sort of 5-day, 4 modules of training, and I want to bring it back to the participants now. But just before I do, just to say again, Jesse, thank you so much for joining, and very look forward to hearing how the Alliance moves from strength to strength, and look forward to staying in touch to hear about all of your ongoing activities. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Bye. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, this is the final bit where we're just going to have a little chat amongst all of us. So if you could put your videos on, please, as much as possible, put on your videos, because this is just an opportunity to, what I'd like is just 2 or 3 people in the last 2 or 3 minutes, just to sort of talk about, just to say, one thing that they're taking away from the 4 modules of training. And then just one thing. It might be a tool, it might be a framework, it might be that it got you thinking about your partnership in a particular way, whatever it might be. Just have a think, and then as soon as you've thought of one thing that you think that you'll take away from this training, then please just put up your hand or just take yourself off mute and just tell us what that one thing is. Dr. Kunjapi, over to you. Just very concisely, if you will. I'm not seeing you. Where are you? I saw you raised your hand, but I can't see you. There we go. Dr. Kunjapi? Afraid we're not hearing you. That's unfortunate. Maybe if you could put it in the chat instead, and or as you're trying to connect, maybe have somebody else just fill in. Edward, go ahead.
I have one. Just that there's a community of other people out there who are trying to do the same thing I'm trying to do, and that it's quite hard, and it's unleveraged and complicated power balance and complicated partnership dynamics, and everyone's wrestling with the same stuff. It's good to know.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that feeling of community, that we're not alone, we are all having the same issues. Absolutely, that's a really good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who else? Prasad, go ahead.
First off, thank you for hosting this wonderful event. It's kind of both learning and refresher stuff for me. It's amazing how all the speakers shared their knowledge along with you, and with the framework how we need to move along to build successful partnerships to solve the huge problem. Without Ocean, we are not here. No, it's going to be there, but we wouldn't be here. So it is the basic common sense approach to begin with, and also all the as discussed, all the partnerships needed to be built upon the sustainability goals. Unless we'll be sitting here and discussing the same thing again after a decade or more, with more damage. And it's our utmost responsibility going through this kind of programs and learning from each other, meeting each other online, maybe in person later on, and do the right stuff which we could do in our power to fix this big problem. There is betterment for everybody if we could join hands and prosper in partnerships and learn from each other and execute the plan in a perfect way to bring our civilizations to the next level, to safeguarding everybody, including marine animals. Thank you.
Prasad, thank you so much. So beautifully put. I think that's a perfect ending to our final day of training. I'd like to thank very much the co-hosts of OHLLRS and UNDESA and the Irish government for supporting this training of the last 4 days. Also, really like to thank Jordan from UNDESA, who has been the person sort of behind the scenes of all of this training, and thank you very much indeed for that. Finally, of course, we just wanted to thank all of you for being here for these last 4 modules, and for all your excellent questions, your engagement, your group discussions, and I very much hope that this has been a useful training to you. and very much look forward to hearing about your progress and how you take forward these collaborations and partnerships, because partnering is challenging. It is difficult to do, particularly across societal sectors, but there is no way that we are going to be able to deliver on SDG 14, as Prasad has been saying, unless we collaborate far more and far more effectively. So thank you all very much indeed. And I look forward to coming across you in various other guises over the next few months. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Sir, I am the personality and the speaker.
Bye.